You are surrounded by the suffocating stench of sulphur and damp coal soot that has seeped into every fibre of your curtains, your skin, and your lungs. To the outside world, you are a picture of Victorian elegance, but underneath that starched, razor-sharp collar or that bone-crushing corset, you are physically bruising your body just to maintain the moral posture demanded by society. The year is 1880, and London is a city of brutal, suffocating contradictions. While the rising middle class displays their wealth in pristine parlours filled with William Morris wallpaper and exotic curiosities, a hidden army of invisible servants is fighting a losing battle against filth, disease, and exhaustion in the windowless shadows of the basement. Why was a simple weekly bath considered a grueling luxury that required hours of manual labour? How did the very decor in your home, from the paint to the fabrics, possess the literal power to poison your family while they slept? And what was the terrifying reality behind the rigid social codes that governed every movement of your fork and every word you spoke? We are tearing down the velvet curtains and stepping past the polished mahogany to reveal the gritty, gaslit reality of a Victorian house. By the end of this journey, you'll realise that for most people in 1880, home sweet home was actually a high-stakes struggle for survival. To understand the Victorian home, you first have to understand the war being waged against the city outside. By 1880, London was the largest city the world had ever seen, but it was also a churning engine of soot. Coal wasn't just a fuel, it was a film that covered everything. It turned the Thames into a black sludge and the air into a yellow pea soup fog that could literally suffocate the elderly and the weak. Inside your home, the battle against this external filth was a moral crusade. If your windows were streaked or your brass was dull, it wasn't just a sign of a messy house, it was a sign of a decaying soul. This is why, at 5:30 a.m., while the master and mistress of the house are still buried under heavy wool blankets, the house is already vibrating with silent, frantic movement. The invisible inhabitants, the servants, are the first to feel the bite of the 1880 winter. There is no central heating. To warm a single room, you need a coal fire, but fires create ash. Every morning, a housemaid must rake out the clinkers from the previous night, scrub the grates with black lead, and carry heavy scuttles of fresh coal up 3 or 4 flights of stairs. It is back-breaking, lung-blackening work, all performed in the dark, so that the family never has to witness the ugliness of the labour that keeps them warm. For the middle-class family, the home was a stage. Every room was designed to project a specific image of wealth and proper Christian values. The parlour was the most important set piece. It was crammed, literally stuffed, with furniture, heavy velvet drapes, and shelves of porcelain. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was a psychological defence mechanism. In a world that was rapidly changing due to the Industrial Revolution, the Victorians were terrified of empty space. To them, a bare room was a sign of poverty or, worse, a lack of character. But this obsession with fullness came at a physical price. These rooms were death traps for dust and bacteria. Those heavy curtains didn't just block the drafts, they trapped the sulphurous smoke from the gas lamps and the germs of the various fevers that haunted the streets. And yet, the residents would sit in these rooms, stiff and upright, encased in their moral armour. For a man, the detachable starched collar was a torture device. It was so stiffened with rice starch that it felt like a ring of plastic around the throat. If you tilted your head too quickly, it could chafe your skin raw. For a woman, the corset was a mandatory internal scaffolding. It didn't just cinch the waist. It displaced internal organs and restricted the lungs to about 20% of their natural capacity. They weren't dressing for comfort. They were dressing to prove they had the discipline to endure pain for the sake of social standing. You've probably been told that the Victorians were repressed and obsessed with etiquette. And that's true. They lived by a code so rigid that even the way you held a teacup could determine your daughter's marriage prospects. They were terrified of the outside world, the dirt, the poor, the disease, They spent every waking hour and every penny they earned trying to turn their homes into a sanctuary of purity and health. But here is the terrifying irony that history books often skip over. While they were scrubbing the floors with lye and bleaching their linens to stay pure, the very things they bought to make their homes beautiful were actually killing them. The sanctuary they built wasn't protecting them from the toxic world outside. It was a highly concentrated, designer-labeled death trap. And the most dangerous thing in the house? It wasn't the soot or the sewage, it was the colour of the walls. It was called Sheila's Green, a vibrant electric emerald that defined the decade. It was everywhere, on the flock wallpaper in the dining room, the heavy curtains in the nursery, even the artificial flowers pinned to a lady's hat. But this stunning pigment had a secret ingredient: arsenic. As the damp London air hit the walls, the moisture reacted with the starch paste and the pigment, releasing a steady stream of odourless, colourless arsine gas. You weren't just living in a beautiful room, you were breathing in a slow-motion execution. Families suffered from chronic headaches, weeping eyes, and mysterious skin lesions, all while their doctors prescribed more rest in the very rooms that were poisoning them. The sanctuary was literally shedding toxins into the air, but the walls were just the beginning. If the air didn't get you, the breakfast table would. In 1880, the pure food the middle class craved was often a chemical lie. To keep costs down and colours bright, merchants turned the pantry into a toxic wasteland. That creamy, rich-looking milk? It was often watered down and freshened with borax, or thickened with crushed chalk and sheep's brains. That vibrant green pickle on your plate? It got its colour from being boiled with copper coins. Even the white bread, the staple of the Victorian diet, was frequently bleached with alum to make it look higher quality than the grey, dusty flour it actually was. You were paying for a lifestyle of elegance, but you were consuming heavy metals and industrial chemicals with every bite. Yet, even as you swallowed these toxins, a much more immediate threat was humming behind the kitchen door. The 1880s marked the transition from open hearths to the massive cast-iron kitchen range. It was a marvel of engineering, but it was also a coal-gulping beast that radiated intense, localized heat. In cramped, windowless basement kitchens, the temperature could easily soar past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. For the cook, heatstroke was a daily reality. But for the family upstairs, the modern convenience of gas lighting was the real gamble. Gas lamps didn't just flicker, they hissed. They consumed the oxygen in a room and replaced it with carbon monoxide and sulfur. If a flame blew out or a pipe developed a hairline fracture, a common occurrence in shifting London soil, the result was either a slow, suffocating sleep or a house-levelling explosion. The Victorian home was essentially a pressurised box of flammable gas and toxic fumes held together by nothing but luck and a few layers of lead-based paint. But there was one invention that the Victorians were more proud of than anything else. The one thing that truly separated them from the filthy lower classes. The indoor flushing water closet. By 1880, the S-trap pipe had been invented to keep smells out, but the installation was often a disaster. Thousands of homes were connected to a crumbling, overburdened sewer system that couldn't handle the surge of the growing city. Instead of whisking waste away, faulty venting meant that miasma, the terrifying sewer gas, was often pushed back up the pipes and into the bedrooms. It didn't just smell, it carried the very pathogens the Victorians were obsessed with scrubbing away. Your gleaming porcelain toilet, the ultimate symbol of 19th century hygiene, was often a direct portal for typhoid and cholera to enter the heart of the home. You were scrubbing the floors with carbolic acid until your hands bled, unaware that the real killer was gurgling beneath the floorboards. This leads us to the most heartbreaking contradiction of 1880. Despite the frantic cleaning, the expensive doctors, and the rigid moral codes designed to keep impurity at bay, there was one place in the house where death was almost a guarantee. A place where the most vulnerable were left in the hands of experts who were unknowingly making things worse. To see the true cost of Victorian perfection, we have to climb the stairs to the highest, quietest part of the house, the nursery. The nursery was the quietest room in the house, but it was also the most dangerous. In 1880, a middle-class parent lived in a state of constant, low-level mourning, knowing that a third of all children would not live to see their 5th birthday. To protect them, parents turned to the experts of the day, following rigid manuals that prescribed a terrifying regime of isolation and purity. They believed that by keeping a child in a pristine upper-floor room away from the vulgar influences of the street and the servants, they were creating a fortress of health. But the fortress was built of poison. The nursery walls were often covered in the same arsenic-laced green wallpaper as the parlour, and the toys, beautifully painted lead soldiers and dolls, were coated in toxins that the children would inevitably ingest. When a child became restless or colicky from the lead or the sulphurous air, the solution wasn't fresh air, it was soothing syrup. These bottles, sold over the counter as miracle cures, were frequently laced with massive doses of laudanum and morphine. In trying to soothe their children, Victorian parents were unknowingly sedating them into a state of chronic addiction or, in many tragic cases, a permanent sleep. This is the central, heartbreaking contradiction of 1880. The Victorian family wasn't dying because they were dirty. They were dying because they were trying so desperately to be clean. They weren't suffering because they were lazy. They were suffering because they were working themselves to exhaustion to maintain a standard of living that was physically impossible to sustain. Every choice we've explored, the bone-crushing corsets, the razor-sharp collars, the black-leaded grates and the arsenic-dyed curtains, was a reaction to a world that felt like it was spinning out of control. The Industrial Revolution had promised a utopia of machines and progress, but it had delivered a landscape of soot, disease, and social upheaval. The rigid etiquette and the moral armour of their clothing weren't just about vanity or repression. They were a desperate psychological anchor. If you could control the way you held a teacup, if you could keep your brass shining and your collars white in a city of black fog, then perhaps you could control your own destiny. We look back at 1880 and see a nightmare of designer-labelled death traps, but the Victorians saw a battlefield where they were the soldiers of civilization. They lived in a magnificent, terrifying transition period. They were the bridge between the medieval and the modern. Their suffering was the laboratory for our safety. It was their sickness that led to our food safety laws, their miasma fears that led to our modern plumbing, and their poisoned nurseries that gave birth to the field of pediatrics. The Victorian home was never a sanctuary. It was a high-stakes experiment in how to be human in an industrial world. When you think of that person in 1880, waking up at 5 a.m. in a freezing room, don't just see a victim of history. See a person of incredible, almost unimaginable resilience. They endured the moral bruising of their era because they believed, however wrongly, that they were building a better, purer world. They were a society that spent its life's blood trying to turn a house into a home, unaware that the very walls they built to protect them were the things they should have feared the most. The Home Sweet Home of 1880 was a beautiful, gilded cage, a monument to human willpower and a sobering reminder that sometimes our greatest dangers are the ones we've carefully invited in and painted a vibrant emerald green. The safety of the room you are sitting in right now, the non-toxic paint on your walls, the clean water in your pipes, and the regulations that keep your food pure, wasn't a gift of time. It was a hard-won victory paid for by the invisible suffering of the families we just met. Every modern convenience we enjoy today is essentially a scar from a Victorian wound. We often look at history through the soft, deceptive glow of nostalgia, But as we've seen, the true story is usually buried under layers of soot and emerald green wallpaper. If you believe that history is more than just a dry list of kings and dates, that it is a visceral, high-stakes struggle for survival that still echoes in our floorboards today, then we have many more layers to peel back. We are committed to dismantling the romanticized myths and revealing the gritty, human reality of the eras that shaped us. By choosing to join this community, you aren't just following a channel. You are choosing to look past the velvet curtains. You are deciding that the truth, however unsettling, is worth more than a comfortable lie. We are venturing deeper into these forgotten, dangerous corners of the past every single week, ensuring that the resilience of those who came before us is never forgotten. Click to join our journey, and let's continue uncovering the hidden, high-stakes forces that built the world you live in today.